The air was thick with smoke. Dust curled in the late afternoon sun like a veil dropped over a forgotten battlefield. Somewhere in the distance, a radio crackled with broken code words, half-lost commands desperate to be heard. And then came the silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that rang in your ears, sharp and unnatural, like something vital had just stopped. Sergeant Luke Harper lay motionless, his back pressed against the scorched earth, vision blurring. The explosion had come from nowhere, improvised, precise, devastating. He couldn't feel his legs. Blood trickled slowly down the side of his face, mixing with the Afghan soil. His mind was slipping, heartbeat growing faint. He tried to speak, to call out, but all he could do was whisper one name, Ranger. Out of the dust, a silhouette emerged, not a man. 4 legs, tail low, head scanning. Ranger, a German shepherd bred for combat, trained for precision, trusted with lives. Ranger wasn't supposed to be here. Protocol would have had him pulled back with the others, but something had broken protocol that day. Something stronger than training. Loyalty. Just hours earlier, Luke and Ranger had been leading a squad through a suspected IED corridor. Ranger's ears twitched before the blast, his body stiffened, but there was no time. The bomb was buried. Too deep, too well. It went off beneath the Humvee ahead, chaos, screams, fire, and then separation. Now Luke could barely lift his head, but he saw Ranger approach, cautious but determined, eyes scanning for threats. The dog moved with a limp. There was blood on his paw. And still he came. The silence broke. Gunfire echoed in the hills. Ranger flinched but didn't falter. He reached Luke, circled once, then did the unthinkable. He gripped Luke's vest, strapped with his teeth, and began to pull, inch by inch, foot by foot, through the dust and smoke. This wasn't just instinct. This was memory, training, and something deeper, something unspoken. Far above, a drone operator watching through infrared marked 2 heat signatures moving together, one barely alive, the other refusing to leave. Later, the unit would say they found Luke and Ranger just meters from cover. But the real story began here, in this moment of impossible courage. A soldier down, a dog bleeding, and a bond that would rewrite what we think we know about heroism. Why did Ranger go back when every human was ordered to retreat? And what happened after that moment would leave a nation speechless. Before Ranger ever set foot in a war zone, he was just another curious pup in a litter of 6, born in a training facility in San Antonio, Texas. His ears were too big for his head, his bark a little too eager. But even then, there was something unmistakable in his gaze. Focus, drive, that uncanny ability to look you straight in the eyes like he was listening. At just 12 weeks, he was selected for the military working dog program. While others in his litter were sent to civilian K-9 units, Ranger was fast-tracked, flagged for explosives detection and tactical support. It was there, on the hard-packed training fields of Lackland Air Force Base, that he met the one person who would change the course of his life, Sergeant Luke Harper. Luke didn't want a partner at first. He'd seen friends get too close to their dogs only to lose them in the field. But when he saw Ranger execute a perfect off-leash downstay under simulated gunfire, something shifted. Their bond didn't happen overnight. At first, it was clumsy, mismatched. Pacing, misread commands. Ranger once ate Luke's socks and shredded a sleeping mat. But something changed during a night training mission when a thunderstorm rolled in, and the other dogs panicked. Ranger didn't. He lay silently by Luke's, serene, eyes wide but steady. That night, Luke called him Ironheart. Through months of training, they became inseparable. Ranger learned to recognize 30 types of IEDs by scent alone. Luke learned to read Ranger's posture like a language. Every ear twitch, tail flick, and pause meant something. On missions, they moved as one. Their first deployment was to a U.S. FOB in the mountains of Kandahar province. Days were long, tense. Heat waves shimmered on the horizon. Every morning, Luke would lace up his boots, tap Ranger's vest twice, and whisper, "Let's bring everyone home." And Ranger did. time after time. On one mission, he stopped an entire convoy just seconds before a roadside bomb would have gone off. Another time, he alerted on a tunnel entrance being used to smuggle arms. For that, Ranger received a commendation. Luke pinned a small tag to his collar that night. It read, Guardian. But Ranger wasn't just a soldier. At night, he was the heartbeat of the base. He'd curl beside injured troops, visit bunks during downtime, and somehow always find the guy who missed his kids the most. His presence grounded people. He didn't bark unless it mattered. He didn't leave unless called. There were whispers among the soldiers that Ranger could sense danger before it came. Luke just smiled. He doesn't sense it. He remembers. It wasn't long before the two of them became legends in the unit. Not because of medals, but because of moments. Quiet, unrecorded moments. Like when Ranger stood for hours beside a fallen Marine, refusing food until the body was flown home, or when he nudged a crying private's hand during a letter from home. This was more than handler and dog. This was trust forged in dust and fire. And in the days leading up to the mission that would change everything, that bond only grew stronger, because something in Ranger had started to change. He was restless, more alert. Luke thought it was the desert heat, but it wasn't. Something was coming. It started like any other morning, but beneath the routine beats of a soldier's day, there was something different, something almost electric in the air. At the forward operating base in southern Kandahar, the sky was already bright by 600, casting golden light on tan canvas tents and dust-covered Humvees. The wind carried no warning, just the bitter scent of sand and machine oil. But Ranger knew. Luke had barely finished tightening his boots when he noticed the dog pacing. Ranger usually waited patiently near the entrance, eyes sharp, ears attentive. But this morning he circled, sat, stood again, then barked. Not loudly just once, but enough for Luke to look up. "You sense it too, don't you?" Luke said, reaching for the leash. Ranger didn't wag his tail. His body was rigid. The mission brief had seemed simple enough. Escort a supply convoy through Garrosh Valley, a winding stretch of narrow roads and unforgiving terrain. Intelligence. Mentioned some recent chatter, possible insurgent movement, but no specifics. The kind of risk that was almost routine. Almost by 0900 the convoy had formed. 5 Humvees, 1 MRAP, and 8 soldiers. Luke and Ranger were in the second vehicle, right behind the lead. The road sloped down into the valley, flanked by rock faces that made every soldier twitch. High ground, no visibility. Perfect place for an ambush. Halfway in, Ranger stood. Luke looked down. The dog's muscles were locked, ears straight, tail dropped. Ranger's nostrils flared as he sniffed rapidly, then let out a low, guttural growl. "Hold," Luke said through the radio. Ranger's signaling. Before command could respond, the ground split open. An ear-shattering boom ripped the silence. The lead Humvee exploded in a fireball, twisted metal flying into the air. The shockwave slammed into Luke's vehicle, lifting it briefly before slamming it back down. His head cracked against the window, then blackness. When Luke came to, the world was upside down. Or maybe he was. Smoke filled the air, screams echoed off the rock walls, and the crackle of burning fuel stung his ears. He tried to move. Pain shot up his legs. He looked down. Blood. Shrapnel. His legs wouldn't obey. He reached for his radio. Static. Then, Ranger. The dog was barking, limping, circling him in frantic protective arcs. His fur was matted with blood, not all Luke's. Somewhere in the chaos, Ranger had taken damage too. Gunfire cracked from the cliffs. Ambush. Shadows moved. Luke saw soldiers scrambling for cover, then heard it. "All units, fall back, regroup at Sector Bravo." The order rang out clearly. Tactical retreat. And yet, Ranger didn't budge. He looked at Luke, then toward the hills, then back again. Luke tried to speak. "Go, Ranger, go." But Ranger stayed. With a snarl, he bit onto the loop of Luke's tactical vest and began to pull. One foot, another. The terrain was uneven, full of rubble and debris, but the dog didn't stop. Inch by inch, he dragged his handler toward a partially collapsed ridge that offered some cover. Luke drifted in and out, catching flashes, Ranger snapping at a figure in the smoke, standing guard while bullets whistled, dragging him across a ditch. A second IED exploded. Dust surged again. Ranger stumbled but didn't fall. Above them, a surveillance drone picked up thermal movement. 2 signatures, close together. The analyst called it in. Possible survivor, 1 human, 1 K9, stationary, need medevac. It took 15 more minutes before the medics arrived. When they did, they found Ranger collapsed next to Luke. Chest heaving, paw injured, muzzle scraped raw from dragging. He had never stopped. Luke was unconscious. Ranger was barely holding on. The medics moved fast. They lifted Luke into the vehicle. As they reached for Ranger, he growled. Weak but clear, protective to the end. Only when Luke's hand brushed his fur did Ranger allow himself to be taken. That day, the headlines would read, "Convoy attacked." In Garage Valley, 3 wounded, 1 critical. But what they didn't say, what no dispatch could ever truly capture, was what Ranger had done. Not because he was ordered, not because he was trained, but because he loved. And that was only the beginning of what would become the most unbelievable part of all. The first thing Luke remembered was a voice, soft, distant female, calling his name like it was a question. "Sergeant Harper, can you hear me?" When he opened his eyes, everything was too bright, sterile, cold, not sand and fire, but white walls and the faint beep of machines. A field hospital. He tried to sit up, but his body screamed in protest. Tubes, bandages, monitors. He turned his head slowly. "Ranger?" The nurse looked surprised. "You mean the dog? He's alive. He's stable. Rest now." But Luke didn't rest. Not really. Not until he saw him. 2 days later, they led him into the veterinary wing. Ranger was lying on a padded mat, his front leg wrapped, a gash above his eye, bruises down his ribs. But when Luke entered, Ranger stirred. Tail thumped, once, then twice. Luke knelt beside him. "Hey, partner." Ranger licked his hand. Neither of them needed to say anything. The moment said it all. The rescue team had filled in the blanks. After Ranger dragged Luke to safety, he'd remained with him, refusing food or water, his eyes fixed on the horizon, until help came. Every medic who approached Luke was vetted by growls until Ranger was sure they meant no harm. One soldier joked, "That dog's more Marine than most Marines I know." The news traveled fast, first inside the unit, then across the base. A dog saving his handler wasn't new, but not like this. Not against gunfire. Not under collapsing cliffs. Not dragging a full-grown man through active fire. Command requested a debrief. Luke gave it, still in his hospital bed. The questions were technical, procedural, but Luke's answers were always the same. "I'd be dead if not for Ranger." But even as they recovered side by side, the unspoken reality began to settle. Ranger was injured, badly. His right hind leg had tendon damage. The wound across his side risked infection. And most troubling of all, his response time had dulled. Dr. Morgan, the military vet, put it delicately. He may not return to active duty. Luke sat beside him every day, sometimes talking, sometimes just being there. One evening, as the sun cast gold through the tent flaps, he whispered, "You've done your part, more than enough." But the military had rules. Ranger's status was put under review. He would be evaluated for redeployment. If deemed unfit, he'd be discharged. And with no official adoption request on file, that meant transfer to a government holding facility. Maybe even euthanasia. Luke's chest tightened at the thought. No, not after everything. The next day, he put in the paperwork, requested full custody, promised to handle Ranger's care post-discharge. His commanding officer raised an eyebrow. "You know how much work it'll be?" Luke replied, "I owe him my life." "That's not work. That's thanks." "But bureaucracy." moved slow, and rumors moved fast. One morning, Luke was approached by a journalist embedded at the base. "I heard about the rescue," she said. "Mind if I write about it?" Luke hesitated. He wasn't looking for attention. But then he thought of Ranger, of everything that dog had done without a command. Maybe the world needed to know. He agreed. The why. Article hit a military blog 2 days later. By that night, it had been shared thousands of times. A photo accompanied it. Ranger, eyes alert despite his injuries, lying beside Luke's cot. The story reached stateside media, morning shows, online, veterans networks. Even school children wrote letters. One read, "Dear Ranger, you are my hero. Thank you for saving your friend." And with the attention came pressure. Public pressure. Ranger's status hearing was expedited. Luke prepared his statement. He stood, still on crutches, and addressed the review panel. "You call him a military asset. I call him my brother. He didn't just perform, he chose to save me. That's not training, that's heart." Dr. Morgan testified too. "He's injured, yes, but his spirit is intact. He deserves retirement, not rejection." Even Captain G. Ramirez, who rarely showed emotion, stood and said, "In all my years, I've never seen loyalty like that." The vote was unanimous. Ranger was officially retired and released into Luke's custody. That evening, Luke wheeled Ranger out of the base vet center himself. Soldiers lined the hallway. Some clapped, others saluted. One had tears in his eyes. Outside, the desert air was cool. Ranger lifted his head. "You're going home, buddy," Luke said. Ranger didn't understand the words, but he felt them. And for the first time in weeks, he wagged his tail, not out of duty, but peace. The flight home was quiet, not just because the cargo plane roared loud enough to drown thoughts, but because everything felt suspended in time. Luke sat with his arm draped over Ranger's crate, the dog sedated for travel, his breathing slow, but steady. They were going home, but neither of them would ever return the same. Landing on U.S. soil felt surreal. There was no parade, no ceremony, just tarmac, fluorescent lights, and the heavy scent of jet fuel. Still, Luke's eyes welled up. He stepped off the plane and whispered, "We made it." A few days later, they were home in Virginia. Luke's small house backed onto a patch of woods where birds called and kids played, but it was quiet inside. Too quiet. Ranger lay on a memory foam bed in the corner of the living room. His stitches were healing, and his fur was starting to grow back, but something was missing in his eyes. He didn't wag his tail, didn't perk up at the sound of the door. He slept with his head turned to the wall, flinching at sudden noises. Luke knew that look, because he saw it in the mirror. The VA appointments started. Physical therapy for Luke's legs, counseling for his nightmares. He brought Ranger to his sessions too. The therapists encouraged it. "Dogs heal what medicine can't," one had said, but healing wasn't linear. One afternoon, Luke took Ranger to the park. It was sunny, safe, familiar. But when a group of kids popped a balloon nearby, Ranger collapsed. Tail between his legs, chest heaving, eyes wild. Luke dropped beside him and held on, whispering, "It's okay. It's over." But it wasn't over. Not really. Not for either of them. Weeks passed. Ranger began to respond to routine. He'd greet Luke at the door again, nudge his arm for attention, follow him from room to room like old times. But nights were still hard. He'd whimper. In his sleep, paws twitching like he was still running, still pulling someone from fire. Luke started writing. Not for anyone else, just to remember. He wrote about Kandahar, about the mission, about what Ranger did when no one else could. And he posted one story, just one, on a veterans forum. The response was immediate. Dozens of messages. Other soldiers, handlers, families. People saying, "This helped me." One woman shared, "My brother was saved by a dog like Ranger." He never got to thank him. Luke kept writing, sharing, not out of pride, but out of purpose. Then came the email, A small nonprofit in Texas was organizing a K-9 honor walk, an event to recognize retired military dogs and raise awareness for their care after service. They wanted Ranger to be their guest of honor. Luke was hesitant. "He's not ready," he told the organizer. But the woman on the line replied gently, "Neither are most of us. But sometimes healing means letting others see the scars." So, they went. It was a warm spring day. Veterans, families, kids, and handlers gathered in a large park. There were flags, booths, a small stage. And when Ranger arrived, limping slightly, head high, the crowd stood and clapped. Luke walked him slowly down the path. People reached out to touch him. Some cried. One old man removed his hat and saluted. Later on stage, Luke spoke into the mic, voice steady. "This isn't a story about a dog. It's a story about what love looks like when everything else falls apart. Ranger didn't just save my life. He gave it back to me." The crowd was silent. Then someone shouted, "Thank you, Ranger." And the applause returned, louder this time, freer. After the ceremony, a little boy approached, maybe 10 years old. He held out a toy soldier, missing one arm. "For him," the boy said. Ranger took it gently. That night, Luke and Ranger sat under the stars outside their motel. Luke scratched behind his partner's ears and said, "Guess we've got more to do, huh?" And he was right. The next year, Luke partnered with the nonprofit. Together, they started a new initiative, the Guardian Project. Its mission was simple: pair retired K-9s with veterans struggling to heal, not just as pets, but as partners. As family, Ranger became their symbol. His photo, ears alert, eyes steady, was printed on banners and shirts. His story was shared at schools, in therapy groups, in documentaries. He was more than a dog. He was a reason. And for the first time, in a long time, Luke felt something he hadn't in years: hope. Years have passed since that day in Garage Valley, but the story of Ranger and Luke Harper still echoes wherever stories of courage are told. It no longer lives only in official reports or veteran forums. It lives in classrooms, in therapy centers, in shelters where other retired K-9s await their second chance. Ranger, now older, walks slower. His muzzle is gray and the limp in his hind leg is permanent. But his eyes still hold that same sharp focus, that same knowing calm. Luke often says Ranger didn't just rescue him from a battlefield. He rescued him from everything that followed. The guilt, the weight, the isolation that so often haunts survivors. In many ways, Ranger carried him all the way home. Today, their porch in Virginia overlooks a quiet meadow. Ranger lies in the sun, Luke writes. Sometimes kids from the neighborhood stop by just to say hi to the famous hero dog. Ranger doesn't mind the attention. He just wants to be near Luke. Every so often someone writes in, "I read your story. I didn't think I could keep going, but now I think maybe I can." And Luke replies the same way every time. Then Ranger did it again. Because this story isn't just about one brave dog and one lucky soldier. It's about all the things we don't always see. The battles fought after the war, the silent strength of loyalty, the healing power of being seen, truly seen. It's about how, even when the uniform comes off, service continues. In every quiet act of kindness, in every hand extended, in every decision to choose hope over surrender, and yes, it's about how a 5-year-old German shepherd taught an entire nation what courage looks like on 4 legs. So if you were moved by Ranger's story, if something about it lingered with you, don't let it end here, share it. Not for views, not for clicks, but because someone, somewhere, needs to believe that broken things can be whole again, that love is louder than trauma, that loyalty never quits. And stay tuned. Because in our next episode, we follow Ranger's continued journey as a therapy dog for wounded veterans, and the unexpected impact he's had on one little boy who couldn't speak until he met Ranger. Until then, remember, not all heroes wear uniforms. Some just have paws and heartbeats.